My dear child, there is something that was said in a quiet, unguarded moment, something that was never supposed to reach your ears for a long time. And yet, hour by hour, the weight of those words has been drawing closer to you, finding its way toward you whether you were ready or not. The person you love once sat across from someone they deeply trust, and in that ordinary moment, their voice shifted. It grew softer, slower, almost careful, as though they were trying to shield something too tender to say out loud without breaking it. What they said about you didn't begin with your name at all. It began with quiet. And that quiet wasn't empty. It carried something inside it. Don't look away yet, because what happened in that conversation was anything but ordinary. Stay with me until the end, because something significant is waiting for you here. A single sentence changed the entire mood of the room, and the person sitting there listening could tell right away that this wasn't just small talk. Even before your name was spoken, there was already emotion sitting heavy in the air. They looked away first, not because they had nothing left to say, but because they had far too much to say and didn't know where to even begin. The listener asked one simple, gentle question. Why do you keep thinking about them? For a few seconds, there was no reply at all. That pause said more than any quick answer ever could, because sometimes the truth takes its time to arrive when it actually matters. And when they finally spoke, the words came slowly and deliberately, as if each one had already been living quietly inside them for a long while. They said, I don't really know how to put it into words, but there's something about them that stays with me, even when everything else in life keeps moving forward. Listen closely, because that sentence wasn't said carelessly. It came after a lot of private thought, after reflection they never let anyone else see. The person across from them noticed that even while speaking, they seemed to be somewhere else entirely, remembering your voice, maybe, or your presence, or some small detail you never imagined could stay so deeply lodged in someone's heart. Don't stop here, because what came next was even more unexpected. They were asked, gently, Is it serious? And again silence filled the space, but this wasn't confusion or hesitation. It was the kind of silence that shows up when someone already knows the answer but senses that the answer is bigger than anything they usually allow themselves to say out loud. Then they finally admitted, Every time I try to push it aside, something brings it right back. That one confession changed the entire shape of the conversation, because it stopped being casual the moment those words left their mouth. It moved into a place where feelings that had been hidden for a long time simply couldn't stay hidden any longer. The listener leaned in a little closer, sensing that this wasn't about some passing mood or fleeting emotion. This was about something that had somehow survived distance, time, distraction, and even stubborn pride. Stay until the end, because something big is still waiting for you. The person you love then described something about you that even caught the listener off guard. They didn't start with how you look. They didn't start with the circumstances that brought you together. They talked about the way your presence feels simply in memory. They said, even when they're not around, there's this strange calm that comes over me whenever I think of them. That sentence lingered in the room because calm isn't something people casually mention unless it has genuinely touched something inside them. Calm means your presence found its way into places inside them where noise usually lives. Calm means your memory settled exactly where confusion used to sit. The conversation kept going. The listener asked another question. Then why haven't you said more? This time the answer came right away, because some things feel too important to talk about carelessly. That response carried far more truth than they probably meant to reveal. There are feelings people protect, not because those feelings are weak, but because they mean so much that even putting them into words feels like a risk. They weren't hiding emptiness. They were guarding something meaningful. And then came the sentence nobody in that room expected. A sentence so direct that even the listener fell quiet afterward. They said, "Sometimes I wonder if they have any idea how much they changed the way I think." Read that line again, slowly, because this is the moment everything shifted. You may never have witnessed the exact instant your presence began to affect them, but somewhere inside, that moment became unforgettable to them. Something about you reached deeper than an ordinary memory ever could. Something stayed. Don't skip ahead, because the strongest words were still coming. The listener smiled and gently asked, "So, what are you afraid of?" And for the first time, their voice dropped almost to a whisper. They said, "What I feel might already be bigger than I ever planned for it to be." Those words weren't accidental. They came from someone who had tried to measure their own emotions and discovered those emotions no longer fit inside neat, simple explanations. Bigger than planned means your presence in their life grew far past what they expected. Bigger than planned means whatever started quietly never actually stayed small. And once again, your name returned to the conversation, this time spoken with an unusual softness, as though even saying it out loud created a different atmosphere around them. Stay until the end, because something big is still waiting for you. The listener then asked the last question of that particular moment. If they were standing here right now, what would you say to them? And once more, silence. But this silence felt different from before. It wasn't uncertainty, it was depth. After that pause, they answered with a truth they had clearly been holding back for far too long. I would probably tell them that they matter more than they realize. That was the sentence, the one that lingered long after the conversation had ended, the one that kept echoing even after both people had moved on to talk about something else entirely. Because some words don't just fade away once they're spoken. Some words stay alive because they came from a place inside someone that had waited far too long to finally speak. And tonight, that sentence carries real weight for you. Not because every mystery gets solved in a single moment, but because hidden truths often begin exactly like this. Quietly, unexpectedly, through words spoken the instant someone finally stops pretending they feel nothing at all. That sentence landed heavily because repetition has a way of revealing the truth. People can hide their emotions fairly well, but the thoughts that keep returning show what's still alive and active underneath the surface. If someone keeps showing up in your mind again and again, it usually means something unfinished is still very much alive in there. The listener smiled gently and asked, "So why keep it all bottled up inside?" The answer came almost immediately, as though they had already asked themselves that exact question many times before. Because sometimes when something means too much, you start being careful with every single word around it. That wasn't fear talking, that was importance. Carefulness shows up when someone doesn't want something meaningful to be misunderstood. Don't look away yet, because the biggest revelation hadn't arrived just yet. The listener then asked one final question that changed everything in that moment. What would surprise them most if they heard you talking right now? And for the first time, there was no long pause at all. The answer came directly. That I talk about them with more honesty here than I ever have anywhere else in my life. That confession shifted the entire mood of the room because honesty spoken in private often carries far more weight than words spoken out in the open. In that moment, they weren't performing for anyone. They weren't trying to impress a single soul. They were simply saying what had become impossible to keep denying any longer. And then came a sentence so unexpected that even the listener went quiet afterward. They said, "Sometimes I hear something completely ordinary during the day, and somehow it instantly reminds me of them." Think about that for a second. When ordinary, everyday moments start becoming linked to someone, it means that person has moved far beyond simple attention. It means your memory shows up in the middle of everyday life, completely unannounced. A voice, a word, a place, a song, a passing thought, anything at all can suddenly become tied to you without warning. Stay until the end, because something big is still waiting for you. The listener then asked softly, "Do you think they'd actually believe any of this?" A small pause followed, then a quiet reply. "Probably not, because I never let them see how much stays in my mind." And that single sentence explained everything. Not every feeling arrives loudly. Some stay hidden simply because the person carrying them is still trying to understand those feelings themselves. Some truths stay tucked behind silence because silence often feels safer than revealing too much too quickly. But the truth still surfaced that day, one way or another, and before the conversation wrapped up, one final sentence appeared, spoken almost like a private truth slipping out by accident. If they ever knew everything I've admitted here, they would finally understand why forgetting them never became easy. That was the sentence left hanging quietly in the room. No one rushed to break the silence that followed, because some words are simply too complete to interrupt. Don't stop reading now, because what came after this went even deeper, and the next part explains why that conversation didn't actually end when they walked out of the room. It kept going quietly, inside their own thoughts, long after they had already left. Later, when the conversation should have naturally ended, something unexpected happened instead. The person you love didn't leave right away. They lingered there a little longer, as though something unfinished was still pressing against their mind. The listener noticed this and stayed quiet, because sometimes silence is exactly what invites the deepest truth to finally surface. And it did. Don't skip ahead, because the words that followed were spoken more slowly than anything said before them. Stay until the end, because something big is still waiting for you. Without being asked another single question, they suddenly said, "There's something strange about it. Even when I try not to think about them, something always brings them right back." That sentence came without any warning, without hesitation, without any attempt to change the subject. It was simply honesty arriving on its own terms. The listener turned fully toward them, understanding immediately that this had stopped being a simple, ordinary conversation. This had become one of those rare moments when someone begins to reveal what they usually keep carefully guarded. And then came a silence that felt even deeper than the one before it, because once truth starts flowing, more truth usually follows close behind. A few seconds later they added, "It happens at completely random moments in the middle of ordinary things, and somehow it always feels stronger than it did the last time." Those words carried more meaning than they might have realized, because random thoughts don't return with that kind of strength unless the connection underneath them is still very much alive. A passing memory can fade with time, but something that keeps returning stronger every single time has roots that run much deeper than simple, temporary attention. Don't skip this part, because what they said next changed everything all over again. The listener asked carefully, "What comes back first, the memory, the feeling, or the question?" After a brief pause, the answer came. The feeling. That answer mattered more than anything said up to that point, because memory can happen by accident. Feeling is different. Feeling only returns when something inside a person still recognizes meaning that was never fully resolved. This time they didn't say your name right away. Instead, they looked down, almost smiling quietly to themselves, and then spoke in a voice that sounded gentler than before. It's hard to explain, but some people stay in your mind in a way that doesn't ask for permission first. That sentence sat in the room for a while, because everyone understands what an ordinary memory feels like. But this wasn't described as ordinary at all. This was described as something that shows up entirely on its own, something that stays present even when life is clearly moving in other directions. Stay until the end. Something big is still waiting for you. The listener then asked one question that opened the door to an even deeper answer. So, what happens the moment their name comes up? This time there was no attempt to dodge the truth. They answered honestly. Everything else becomes a little less important, even if just for a moment. That confession was more revealing than they probably intended, because when someone admits that everything else fades, even briefly, it means their attention naturally shifts towards something that matters more than they usually let on. And then came another sentence, spoken almost carefully, as if they already sensed it revealed too much. I've started noticing details I never expected to care about. The listener asked, "What kind of details?" A short breath followed. Then, the way they talk, certain words they tend to use, even tiny things nobody else would ever think twice about. That answer explained what had been hidden the entire time. Attention always reveals value. People simply don't remember small, specific details unless those details have quietly become important to them. Don't stop here, because the strongest part was still coming. The listener said softly, "You sound like someone who has already thought about this far more than they'd admit." For the first time, they didn't deny it. Instead, they answered with a sentence that completely shifted the mood. "Maybe I have, more than anyone actually knows." That sentence landed heavily because private, hidden thoughts often carry more truth than anything spoken out loud. What people express openly can be limited. What they think about privately tends to run much deeper. And then came something unexpected, almost like a quiet confession meant only for themselves. They said, "Sometimes I wonder if they can somehow feel any of this, even without me saying a word." That kind of sentence only shows up once feelings have already moved well past simple curiosity, because people don't usually wonder whether someone can sense their thoughts unless those thoughts have become constant enough to genuinely matter. Stay until the end, because something big is still waiting for you. The listener then asked one final question before the entire mood shifted again. If they were standing right here and heard everything you've just said, what would be hardest for you to admit? There was a longer pause this time, filled with visible thought. Then the answer came, spoken with unusual honesty, that I've been trying to act completely normal while quietly caring far more than I ever intended to. That sentence quietly revealed everything. Trying to act normal means something inside has already shifted. Carrying more than planned means the emotion involved has traveled much further than expected. Before they left, they added one final line, one that mattered, because what happened right after they walked away revealed even more than anything said out loud in that room. After they stepped away, the conversation should have simply ended there. But it didn't, because sometimes the truest, deepest truth isn't found in what someone says while they're still in the room. It's found in what they do the moment right after they leave it. The person you love took only a few steps before stopping again. Not because anyone called them back, not because anything around them interrupted their path. They stopped because their own thoughts had suddenly grown louder than everything else around them. Don't skip this part, because what happened in that quiet moment revealed more than every single sentence spoken before it. Stay until the end, because something big is still waiting for you. They stared at nothing for a few seconds, almost as if replaying every word they had just admitted out loud. Then, very softly, as though speaking only to themselves, they said your name once again. That mattered, because people only repeat a name quietly to themselves when the feeling behind it is still very much alive, still active, even after the conversation itself has technically ended. The listener, who hadn't fully walked away yet, noticed this and asked one last unexpected question. Why do you always go quiet after talking about them? The question arrived without any warning, and this time the answer came without any effort to hide anything at all. Because every time I talk about them honestly, I realize just how much I usually keep locked away inside." That single sentence changed the meaning of everything said before it. It meant the earlier words hadn't been the whole truth after all, only the small part that had managed to slip out. Don't skip ahead, because the next revelation carried even more weight than what came before. The listener stayed still and asked carefully, "Then what's still left unsaid?" A longer silence followed, not an empty one, but a genuinely thoughtful one. Then they answered in a softer voice. "Some days I pretend I'm completely focused on other things, but even then, something small reminds me of them before the day is over." That answer was quiet, but it carried real power because hidden remembrance is often stronger than anything spoken out loud. If someone keeps showing up in your thoughts even during the most ordinary moments, it means they haven't just been remembered, they've become woven into the rhythm of everyday life itself. Stay until the end. Something big is still waiting for you. Another question followed. What kind of small things? And the answer came almost instantly, as if those moments had already been counted many times before. A certain phrase, a sound, a place, or even a simple moment that suddenly feels connected to them out of nowhere. That sentence carried something remarkable, because connection like that isn't forced into existence. It shows up naturally, once someone has already taken up more space inside a person's heart than they ever expected. And then, for the first time, a smile appeared that they couldn't quite hide, small, but unmistakably there. The listener noticed and asked, "Why are you smiling right now?" The answer was unexpected, because sometimes memories show up before I've even thought about calling them back. That sentence stayed in the air like a truth too honest to take back. Memories that arrive without any effort mean your presence has settled somewhere deeper than mere intention ever could. Don't stop reading, because what they said next was the strongest line of the entire conversation. The listener said quietly, "You talk as if they changed something important in you." After taking a breath, they answered. They did, even if they never fully realized it themselves. That confession changed everything because change is never something people admit lightly. People only acknowledge being changed once they've felt a real lasting difference settle inside themselves. Then came a sentence so unexpected that even the listener had no immediate response. They said, "There are moments when I wonder if they understand how naturally my thoughts keep drifting back to them. Not forced, not dramatic, simply a natural return." That word mattered, because whatever returns naturally usually runs deeper than anything that only shows up through effort. Stay until the end, because something big is still waiting for you. The listener asked one last question before finally stepping away. If they heard every single word you said today, what would surprise them the most? This time, the answer came without any hesitation at all. That I sound so careful and composed on the outside, but inside my thoughts are so much louder. That line revealed what had been hidden the entire time. Quiet on the outside, far louder within. A person carrying strong feelings often chooses fewer words, not because there's less to feel, but because there's simply too much to put into ordinary language. And before they walked away completely, they added one last quiet truth, almost speaking to the air itself. Sometimes what matters most only becomes visible in the things you never say out loud. That sentence stayed long after everything else had faded, because some truths don't need volume to become unforgettable. Don't look away yet, because what happened afterward, once they were finally alone, revealed something even deeper than anything they had dared to admit in front of another person.